hear me? All right. So Sadish, I also was coming to work this morning and feeling very, very lucky. My commute is a ferry from Alameda to San Francisco. And another reason I feel extremely lucky is that I've been in an operating role here in the Valley for venture-backed startups for about 22 years. Bill, you said that you've been out of college for 26 years, is that right?
Yeah.
I've been out of college for 33. So I also feel lucky just that I'm still around. But having the role of an operator, and again, my title has always been sales operator, but I've always considered myself a revenue operator. And I got my first role in 1997. And this is before SalesSource.com, which came about in 1999. And when it did, my life and my career trajectory completely changed. All of a sudden, because I was the person involved in running all the metrics and all the numbers that allowed the executives and the board and the investors to understand where we were headed, where to steer away from, I got an increasingly larger seat at the table. And now 22 years later, the role of sales operator, marketing operator, now revenue operator is probably one of the most strategic roles in the Valley. And in fact, in some of the work that I do inside the True Ventures portfolio, when they ask me, okay, Lars, we want to get to revenue, we want to start generating demand, I will often suggest that before marketing, before sales, think about the science, think about your tech stack, because so much of the motions and the rhythms that we do today rely on an orchestrated technology stack to get the right message, to get the right content in the hands of your prospects. So I feel very, very blessed to be a part of that over the last 20 years. Today I have an incredible panel in front of me. We all know each other extremely well. I want to have each of them introduce each other. But Hilary and I met each other on a panel 2 years ago in San Diego at the Outreach.io Unleashed conference.
Correct.
And I just want to let you know that I fell for your style, I fell for your best practices, I fell for your
It's working.
intelligence, hook, line, and sinker. And ever since that time, we've gotten closer. And I was very prideful to have been a part of your journey when you left Mind Body and decided to take a leap. And the amount of interest across the hottest companies didn't surprise me at all. You decided to go with Zoom. And so what I'd like you to do now is take a few minutes and get yourself introduced to the crowd.
Sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Hilary Headley. Like Lars said, I've been with Zoom now for about 9 months. They were definitely on a rocket ship when I got there, so I was lucky enough to get a ticket to go and join. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Prior to that, I was at MindBody and then helped with their private equity buyout with Vista. Prior to that was at Alteryx with Scott Jones, who's going to be talking later, and helped with their IPO as well for about a 2-year run. And then prior to that was at lynda.com on their 10 to 100 million run with LinkedIn and then Microsoft. So I'm lucky enough to have a job where those companies typically reach out when they need someone at an operational level to both do some strategy and operations. So it's not me, it's them. I just get to luck out in those pieces. Is that what you're looking for?
That's perfect.
Perfect. I thought you said introduce each other, and I was
No,
like,
no.
I heard that.
yeah, I know. I was like, all right.
This is Hilary.
We just had a baby a month ago. He's a little tired.
Next up is Evan Liang. Evan and I met each other about 5 years ago. I don't know if I was, but I may have been the first enterprise customer, one of the first 5 that Lean Data has. I had just gotten the role of head of sales ops at Cloudera, and we started experimenting with a bunch of outbound messages. We had just gotten our hands on a sales engagement platform, Outreach.io, and started doing some account-based marketing rhythms and motions. And at the time, Cloudera was educating an entire globe about what big data was. And we were generating upwards of 15 to 20,000 inbound raw leads a month. And we had over 3,000 partners. We were doing events at universities. We were doing public training, private training events. And as my growing SDR team was consistently running up against false positives as far as inbound leads, we found this technology that allowed us to kind of pattern match and understand if those inbounds were falling against our target addressable market. And it turned out at that time that 90% of those 20,000 inbound leads a month were falling outside of our target addressable market. And so with the simple implementation of lean data, we probably put 3 to 4 hours a day back in each SDR's timetable in order to focus more on the outbound. So for me, it was revolutionary. I'd been working with CRMs my whole life, and it just blew me away that no one had figured out how to do this. And now it's become the cornerstone and strategy for anyone who has an account based. So it's been an incredible journey for me to be a part of. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Sure thing. So Evan Liang, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Lean Data. We've been around for 7 years. Since we're comparing ages, I'm older than I look. So I've been out of college close to 2 decades now. I think we've been very fortunate at Lean Data for over the last 7 years to work with some of the fastest growing rocket ships out there, and specifically watch the rise of ops. So if we look at our customer base, why Sapphire invested in us was, I think like 16 or 17 of their portfolio companies, this was 3 years ago, were Lean Data customers. So if I go through the speaker list, ThoughtSpot, Pendo, Cloudera, Procore, Looker, Alteryx, they all use us. And I'm not saying that just as a brag, but it's the fact that you guys are all sharing the same pain points and struggling. And as you grow companies at fast speed, you're breaking your processes around ops very, very quickly. And you need a technology and data solutions in order to help that. Not just also what we're about to talk about is the people processes in order to allow you to, as the CEO mentioned, how do you compress those go-to-market cycles so you can scale faster? And so at Lean Data, we've been fortunate to be part of many, many companies and help them do that. And along the way, we've really seen this huge trend of ops kind of being a back office function to being really, really strategic. And I think RevOps is the future of that. And that's why I'm passionate and wanted to kind of be part of that and share what we're seeing.
That's awesome. And I'm leaving Curran last here. So the story between Curran and I hired Curran as an intern, his first job out of college when I was at ArcSight. ArcSight had just been acquired by HP, and I had some intern slots, and Curran came onto my team. And I have never seen anything like what happened after I hired Curran Singh. And I'm sure all of you have hired people that defy logic as far as what they're capable of, what their stretch potential is. And Curran was that for me. In fact, within a year of the transition of ArcSight becoming a public company and then getting acquired by HP, Curran and I decided to leave HP together and start our own company, which we ran together for 3 years. Then we got a call from the CEO of Cloudera, and we made a strategic decision to leave our small little advisory firm and join Cloudera. Curran as the ops leader and I as a inside sales leader. And so over the last 12 years, I have watched Curran grow up in this industry and today become one of the most strategic revenue operations leaders that I've ever seen. A month ago, he made the decision to leave the partnership, and he's now VP of Revenue Operations at Procore, which is another unicorn company, 300 plus million. Anyway, Curran, why don't you introduce yourself?
I think you actually introduced me pretty well. Hi, everyone. I'm Curran Singh. As Lars mentioned, I'm the VP of Revenue Operations at Procore. Before that, I've actually been almost exclusively a sales operator. So the focus was on sales, not necessarily marketing operations. I did have a chance to dabble in some of that when I was in the consulting space, along with Lars and SalesSource. So I've kind of seen the full cycle, but the focus has historically been on sales ops. Coming into Procore has been down the path of revenue operations for about a year now. So they've gotten a little bit more mature as to what that looks like, what the sort of the org design looks like, how do we interact with other people, other cross-functional groups. So looking forward to sharing some of that with this group and some of my learning so far. And I think that transition is it's an interesting one. So hopefully we can help guide you through what that looks like.
So I'll start off with the first question with you, Curran, because I know working together for so many years, we've been on the sales operations side, and we've always had the marketing operations side that we've worked with, tried to work with, sometimes worked with, and they really have been silos. Certainly they were siloed at ArcSight, certainly they were siloed at Cloudera, but we've also seen together through technologies that we've implemented that the orchestration and motions of sales and marketing in this new account-based world, modern world that we live in. Maybe you can comment on what you've seen as far as the silos of marketing and sales operations and how you've seen those, seeing those come together.
Yeah, so I think it's actually a couple of things. So I was thinking about this before this session, and it's funny. Most of my career, I would argue, is kind of defining the problem statement that revenue operations solves for. So more so than revenue operations itself. So when I think about my time at Cloudera, even at ArcSight, what would happen is marketing ops lives in their own silo. We within sales ops live in ours. And there was a little bit of a he said, she said, or they said, we said sort of conversation, right? Around everything from metrics to strategy to the systems that are implemented. And I think when I was earlier on in my career, what would happen is that we had Eloqua, we had Salesforce.com. The designations between those two were actually pretty clear to me. It was early stage with both of those tools, and that handoff process was a little bit clunky, but sort of the roles and responsibilities were more clear. As I went into Cloudera and we had to get more creative about how we solve for the problems we had, and again, we had a very sizable top of the funnel, what would happen is that we started purchasing technologies on the sales ops side that were more sort of analogous to what marketing ops was doing, and then marketing ops was doing the exact same thing on their end. And what would happen is that there's this blurring of lines between the two sides, which made it really hard to work with the two groups. It made it really hard for us to kind of define the process, the strategy together. So that was kind of what I observed in that whole process. I'll take it sort of flash forward to what I've seen at Procore. That's kind of what we've been trying to solve. We still have those same challenges, right? Those tools still exist. We still have outreach that does a little bit of what marketing automation does, right? We have marketing automation that does a little bit more of what sort of we do within the sales engagement, sales opportunity management side. All that still happens. But having put it under put all of this under a singular umbrella, it allows me to kind of govern what that overall flow looks like from a process, data, and technology standpoint. And then it's really up to me to go to my cross-functional leaders and then go explain to them what we think that the right process is and why it works the way that it does, and then pressure test that with them. So we kind of build that backbone, or sort of the proposal for that backbone, and then we bring in those other leaders to kind of solve for sort of the business requirements along the way. To me, that's worked a little bit better so far from what I've seen, versus in the past where, again, there's all this disconnect that we were trying to solve for almost backwards. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
Hilary, I'm just going to hand it over to you. I'm
Sure.
sure you can carry this conversation forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Karan, it was a lot of trying to decide how to define marketing ops or sales ops or revenue ops. The past two companies I've been at, though, I think have had a unique flavor that I was not used to. Prior companies really anchored around MQLs and SQLs. So understanding the clear top of funnel motion, what was a MQL, an interesting moment, who did what were the different touch points. The last two companies and Zoom today, we don't have MQLs or SQLs. Marketing brings them to the door and the rest is left for sales. So in a way, in sales ops, we're almost doing some marketing ops because we have to come up with what the right nurture paths are through outreach in some of those areas. So we're operating under a revenue ops umbrella, if you will. But I think one of the differences that we don't have, I don't think we did, is customer success and sales engineering operations has typically fallen under the sales operations purview. And so I think when you're looking at I know customer journey gets used a lot, but when you're looking at what your customers are going through, who are the folks that you want having aligned on your process, your systems, and your data? If you have good data, you get to your insights, your strategy, and your planning, and it's a nice circular view. But I think that's a question that has been helpful in trying to decide, is it RevOps or SalesOps? At the last company that I was at, MindBody, we did anchor around RevOps, and we actually created revenue enablement and took it a step further. And I think that's been an interesting kind of piece in the journey. That's also happening for those of us in the sales operations kind of arena. I'll just end with a joke. I have to get approval to come and talk, and so I reached out to my PR gal, and she goes, RevOps, what is that? Is that just your new name for SalesOps? And I said, ha, that is funny, Priscilla. But she's right in a way, because I look back historically a couple years ago, and I was managing marketing ops and sales ops and support ops, and we just called it SalesOps. So in a way, what's old is new again, but I think what's really changed in the past 7, 5, and even 3 years is how much there is that's coming through that ecosystem. Again, just through your process, your systems, and your data alone, not even getting on top of strategy and helping with that piece, I think is its own just giant mission and piece that we're trying to solve for as best as we can, and at companies that want to see those same sales and marketing costs, that can be a little tricky to make sure that you're managing that robust piece. And just a nod to Evan, Lean Data was the piece that directly connected our marketing ops and sales ops team in prior life. It took out any type of he said, she said, we said, they said conversation. And so I think there are some tools that really can be bringing those organizations together, and the sooner you're anchored around that and the data that comes out of it and how you're going to use it, I think the better you can be if that's a path that you choose to take. For me, though, the difference has been, are you on an MQL SQL model or not? And then do you include your customer success and SE operations going through those pieces as well, either literally as a function, rolling up through one person, or with a disciplined focus on some cross-department meetings? I think those, to me, are some of the questions and kind of trigger points.
By the way, I'll double click on that, and I'm sure you have another question. But so for us, within RevOps, that's very similar. So we do have MarkOps, SalesOps, and Customer Success Ops. They all fit under the umbrella, and I think that was very important because in my past life, CSOps becomes kind of a second-class citizen, right? When I think about the planning cycle, for instance, SalesOps drives the planning cycle. And then we almost prescribe to marketing. We almost prescribe to CS Ops as to what that go-to-market strategy is. And that's where I see a lot of the friction from the strategy side. So having those three under the same umbrella is certainly a big part of it. And then, like as I mentioned, we have an overlay of our strategy function that supports all three groups. We have an overlay for enablement, field enablement, that also overlays to all three groups. And then we also have one on what I refer to as field sales operations that overlays to all three groups. So that's sort of the tip of the spear within operations that goes hand in hand with our second line leaders, third line leaders, and helps them sort of execute on some of the strategic vision that the corporate team puts in place. So another way to put it is, I think you kind of need all of it all massed together under the same umbrella in order for this to be effective, mainly because there's so much technology, so much process, so much in terms of measures and dimensions, all these different things we need to get crisp within the operational framework, and to roll this out effectively, both from a strategy, implementation, execution, and enablement standpoint, it's an arduous task when it's separated out. And by the way, I'll also +1 lean data, that was a big one for us too. Not trying to sell for you, but that was a big one for us. I think then it becomes one single funnel, right, that we're solving for. That to me was paramount in past lives.
And what we're seeing is kind of the big driver around breaking down these silos is really around kind of helping all B2B companies really improve the buying experience. And so to illustrate that, I kind of like to always do like an audience participation survey. So how many people, raise your hands if you've had a good experience buying from a site like Amazon or your favorite e-commerce site. You click it, immediately get down. So that's how everyone raised their, a lot of people raise their hand. Now raise your hands if you've had a good experience buying B2B technology. So, right? You chuckle, right? No one raised their hands, right? And that talks about that gap here. And in order for us to solve that, and we should solve it, because you think about it, when we're selling B2B software, we're selling products that are way more expensive than the $25 minimum that you need for Amazon Prime. And yet we're not delivering that experience, partly because of some of the challenges around the data processing technology. And I think the whole idea of RevOps is, from the people perspective, helping to solve that. But as Karan and And Hilary mentioned there's also a lot of data and technology. So I actually do think one of the things we've always struggled with at Lean Data is we never fit neatly into sales tech or MarTech. We were always between because we were helping bridge these different groups. Sometimes they were at war with each other, but we had to still do our best job to bridge these groups. And we're excited about RevOps because we do think there will be a stack that emerges, kind of RevOps technology and the vendors have to play nicely. I don't think there will be vendors 10 years from now who are in sales tech and MarTech that don't play nicely with each other. You have to, because it's one single buying experience, and that's kind of what we're driving at, and I think that's what RevOps is part of that movement.
Can I make one more comment on that?
Please.
Sorry, I know Lars.
No,
you're not
go.
moderating.
I was told as a moderator, speak less.
We're moderating ourselves here a little bit. Yeah.
Because it's such a key piece, though, that I think is missing, which is there are so many systems, they don't all talk together. And we started kind of talking about if you have process systems and data debt, you have operational debt. And if you have operational debt, you will never be able to be strategic. So by design, you have strategic debt. So you cannot get to having a great strategy and having that out if your operations are not clean. And it's not sexy and exciting to invest in operations, and I know that, but it can really help in the long run. So it's balancing the scale and the growth, the escalator and the stairs to get there, but making sure that you do that. It can help that minute you need to be more strategic if you've really taken care of those pieces and wiped away some of that operational debt.
Yeah, and I'd build on that. Like I think per Sunish's presentation, appreciate ops people. Because ultimately, if we actually, plus one
Thanks, man.
But I think ultimately it doesn't sound sexy, but if we do improve the buying experience, right, that it leads to a lot of customer loyalty. Because if people have a bad buying experience, most of their impressions around your brand and whether they like your product really get made up during that initial buying experience. So the days of like, I used to remember some old school quotes like, you know, we didn't do a good sale until we pissed off the customer because that means we got every dollar of those. I think in today's environment, that's over. So you really have to deliver on that in order to have high retention and loyalty and virality for your product. So I think ultimately what we're trying to do on the ops side does drive into accelerating revenue and helping people build these rocket ships.
And the ops community is small.
Yeah.
I mean, we call each other. Are you using this? Is it working? What was it like? Did they implement it? Did they help you? Did they really help you get down the stream? Did they understand that your team is small? Those are all things that we talk about in ops. I mean, we have at Zoom, we have 35 in our sales tech stack alone, and we manage them front to back. That's not counting the 75 in IT. Mm-hmm. So we have to provision support with our 2-person team and make sure that everybody has what they need. And so knowing your, leaning in with your ops friends does matter, and we do kind of talk amongst ourselves and
all the time.
Those things.
Yeah. Also, in the back of my mind, I hear my CRO talking to me and saying, "Hey, what does this all mean from a revenue standpoint?" And I'll just make one comment on that too, with regards to operations. A lot of companies I've been in past lives, they have gone through hypergrowth. ArcSight went through hypergrowth. Cloudera went through hypergrowth and through public events. And there was a difference between sort of jerry-rigging that hypergrowth by throwing bodies at the problem and continuing to add capacity versus really thinking about how that looks sustainably. And to me, operations is how you sustain growth. So capacity is one thing. We can always throw bodies at the problem, add more sales reps, and increase capacity. But invariably what ends up happening is as you scale, your productivity goes down per salesperson. So how do you go solve for that? That comes from enablement. That comes from putting in the right systems, putting in a seamless process, really driving the customer experience. That productivity metric, if you can see that go up into the right while you're scaling, or at least maintain and stabilize, that to me is something that the street cares about, our board cares about, investors care about, and that's how you drive multiples. To me, that one is paramount. And I've had this conversation with my CRO, is that's what we do. You want to be able to associate sort of revenue metrics, ROI, to what operations does. Hold me accountable to the productivity number. That's what we're driving, and that is how we sustain the business. So that's my little plea bargain for those who are looking to invest in ops. There's significant sort of value there outside of just a soft piece.
So Evan, you have this unbelievably great technology that so many of us are using every day, and you've, together with sales engagement platforms, you've helped bring sales and marketing together. Now at hundreds and hundreds of customers, you've seen the divide, you've also brought them together. Give us some sense of what you're doing today. I know that you have plans for tools and platform for revenue operators to perhaps automate some of this, which has really been a very manual process with finance being involved and all the different silos coming together and trying to be data-driven, but still doing a lot of art with the science. So help us understand where you might be taking this.
Yeah, so I think for us it's really easy because we can learn a lot from our customers and just look at their pain points. Unfortunately for ops people, they're very forthcoming around it. So Lean Data, we started with kind of solving, so we started with like kind of data, well, look for anything that you guys are using an Excel spreadsheet for. That's a key. I think someone had a great quote, like if you build a great company, just find an Excel spreadsheet use case and then build a application on top of that. And very much similarly, so we started with the data layer, solving some problems around lead to account matching, which was core to account base and how Lars has used that. We started solving some of the people challenges around workflow. And then for us, the next thing is we see a lot of challenges around what ops people spend a lot of time on, around that strategy and planning process. That is still very much done in Excel spreadsheets today, passing data back and forth. And for us, it's just about kind of adding these layers to really make the ops person job better so that they stop spending their time on manual work and start spending time on the strategies and driving the revenue. So for Lean Data, it's really around our kind of modules are like execution analytics, and the new one is really around planning. And we actually think a lot of people are struggling with planning these days. It's a multi-month process. No one's doing it well. Most of the customers I've talked to, they're always like, come on, someone's got to be doing it better than us. The answer is no. Everyone's really struggling. And so we think there's a huge opportunity to continue to help that. But per Lars' point, we don't actually think for RevOps, we can solve it by ourselves. So the big thing for us is really working well with all the other vendors. Outreach was an early example, SalesLoft, and we Pendo, and we really think we have to, actually it's the ecosystem, and it's too big of a problem for any one vendor. Well, the SalesSource may claim they can solve it over the future, but for right now, the vendors have to work well together, and that's why I think it's a stack. It's not just, just not one solution.
So I want to make sure we have 10 minutes, get questions from the audience. As you guys think about your cool questions, I do want to offer for those of you that are startups, starting your journey, there's a group called the Modern Sales Pros. How many people here have heard of that?
Nice.
About a third of the room. So if you're a startup, you're a founder, you're a revenue leader, and you haven't heard of it, this has now become, think of Hilary and Curran and myself, we're members of about a 13,000 person community, all operators, analysts, inside sales managers and leaders. And for the last 4 years, the amount of knowledge and best practices that come from this group as a Google group and emails, and you can ask questions. We've gotten so much better together as a community, sharing our problems, our trials, our successes, our failures. And I'd really promote those of you that haven't heard of it, that have a CRO or an operations analyst. You can't be an individual contributor salesperson, but if you're in the operation, you're in sales, marketing, leadership, you can become a member. And it's an unbelievable asset. So just a plug for the Modern Sales Pros. So let me open it up to questions.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So finding this talent's tough, right? So two-part question. What are the hidden gems of people that would be great at these roles that aren't doing it today? And what type of questions would you be asking them in some sort of the interview process to determine if they're the right fit?
Hilary?
I'll probably answer that 3 ways. First, I get hit up at least 2 to 3 times a week for who do I know. So the supply and demand is wildly off, so what you're feeling is real. And that piece. I think there are a lot of hidden folks if you're looking at a little maybe less on the systems process data and more on the strategy insights planning at your friends in FP&A. There are some superstars in FP&A, especially if there's a sales FP&A group, that could outdo, I think, a lot of us that are in the business and sales ops and making sure that that's running in the FP&A group. I think the other arena is looking at some of those folks in enablement. So enablement has gotten very systems process and data-y, and not just what's happening with product and playbooks and all of those areas. Finding those folks who maybe want to make that flip over to the operations side can be a piece there as well. They might not have the territory quota, comp, pipeline forecasting kind of mix that you might see in sales operations, but those are some of the good places that you can find it. Otherwise, it is finding folks who you can ask that might kind of know people there. The other thing is to change it from sales ops. That's not always the most exciting title, I think, for folks. And they know that it can be a catch-all. So explain it in a way that might be a smidge different, or looking at splitting up your operational functions and maybe those two areas of kind of planning strategy, data and systems for that. So no matter what, they'll find somebody who's good at process. If they're not good at process, the rest, I would argue, can fall down pretty quickly.
So I fully agree
Sorry,
with
I
you on, no, you're fine. I fully agree with you on all that. So Procore is headquarters in Carpinteria, which is right next to Santa Barbara. So that's like, I mean, it's off in a little corner. And look, our office is on the beach and it's fantastic, but that only goes so far. So we do, it's not that we struggle with finding talent, it's that finding the right talent is incredibly important, and we have to be really mindful and thoughtful. I'll plus one Hilary on looking at FP&A. I think that's fantastic. It also depends on the type of individual you want in which aspect of the organization. So for us, for instance, we have within RevOps, we have what we refer to as BAs and BSAs, right? Business analysts, business systems analysts. BSAs are far more technical, right? They're hands-on keyboard. BAs are a little bit more, we'll do the business requirements, the functional requirements, the change management, that sort of work. More of the process side. For the BSAs, I would also encourage looking in IT organizations. There's some interesting folks there that are interested to transfer over. I've actually seen some folks coming from product side that come over, so product management. They're very good at sort of really project managing large projects as well. I think that works really well. The other thing I would say is, so I'm a big fan of kind of having diversity of hire in terms of the profile as well. So certainly I want to hire the folks that have done it before, gone through the rocket ship ride, seen a public company, what that operates. I think in strategy that makes a lot of sense. But I also like bringing folks from sort of the startup organizations, the one that have gone from 0 to 50 to $75 million, because those individuals, they didn't really realize it, but they were revenue operations because they had to do a little bit of everything. So they understand that full stack. And so that certainly helps. And then I'll say this, because this to me is something that I think is in the DNA of Procore and something I'm a big proponent of as well, is it has so much more to do with not just who you hire, but how you train, retrain, and continue to train them, right? Not everyone's the unicorn, but you can build that vision for them as to how RevOps looks, help sort of coach them up on the different aspects that they may be weak on, allow for them to cycle through different aspects of the organization as well within revenue operations. There's a couple of different ways that you can go about it in that fashion as well, that up-levels a group as a whole. So training, retraining, and continuing to push that, to me, is really how you go from good to great, above and beyond just the recruiting side.
And the one thing I'd add, I've seen a couple of our customers come from consulting, especially at some of the bigger companies, because they kind of have that training and high-level experience.
Yep.
Yes. Time for one more question.
Okay, so we're about 2 years into our RevOps journey. We essentially pulled out all the ops people out of the business functions across SDR, marketing, sales, and CS. And the change management there was insane, right? Like, you essentially took away all of the operations people from the business and then told them no 100 times.
Yep.
And then define the strategy on how we're gonna run the business, essentially, right? I mean, we joke that ops people run the company, right? So, so I would say, I would have a question to you guys who have also gone through this RevOps journey. Like, what landmines can we continue to avoid? Because it was super painful. And we had to turn over a lot of the team because the ops people who were there at that point were not invested in. And were just essentially like assistants to the business as opposed to strategic people who are moving the business forward. I'd just be curious to see what landmines you guys either stepped in or avoided over time.
The first one, I think, Dana Therian at Sirius had published a lot of good materials around RevOps, right? And I think one of the key points he makes is people often confuse RevOps with organizational change, and they try to do the organizational change first versus getting the strategy and alignment and all the other stuff in place as well. So I think that's one landmine, is just don't think about the org, think about the overall strategy and all the other processes and data and technology that you need to have in place, and then add the people. And sometimes RevOps is just a committee of the willing versus necessarily having to be org chart changes. So.
Yeah, I think maybe similar to what you said, when we made the RevOps change at MindBody, it was almost a year of planning and documenting and what is it going to be and where is it going to go and who is impacted and what are the trade-offs, and doing a lot of side education and getting just buy-in really, really slowly. I don't know how to untie maybe what's happened there, except you might, anytime you centralize things, right, there's that risk that people lose their person. Maybe decentralizing is the option, or you really have to come together functionally and maybe come up with those mission statements or whatever those rules of engagement are together that folks feel like they can now be bought in on. So own it, be transparent, change it, and maybe that's the best way. But if you don't have folks who are willing to honor both sides, that's what you have to do in operations a lot of the time. You have to make sure that your sales leaders are really happy and that finance is really happy. You're constantly dancing between all these different groups. And if your folks aren't able to do that and kind of manage that piece, then maybe they're not the right folks for a centralized organization. They might flourish better in a decentralized where they can play like a friend versus a parent. I don't mean to sound like we're parents in ops, but that kind of concept of like you've got to manage both of those really, really equally in those pieces.
Yeah,
So that's why I'd say
I think we got to a really good place. It was a lot of pain getting there.
Yeah, I wouldn't put the organizational change first. People have to feel really safe in that change. I don't know if you would.
Yeah, no, I know we're out of time. I'll just double click on that.
Are we getting the hook? We're getting the hook.
We're getting the hook. I just say that in my experience, that it is a journey, right? We're still facing it. We're going to continue to face it. I think part of it is, I actually find that at the IC level, at the individual contributors, there's good collaboration there, right? Where I've found more of the challenges at the executive level, right? So my marketing leader is probably not used to having markups not reporting up to them. My CS leader is not used to. So it's a little bit of, the onus is on us actually to have those conversations, that come to Jesus moment with them and say, hey, this is how we operate. And then it's a little bit of a negotiation too, just like in planning. It's helping them understand roles, responsibilities that we have, what our mission vision is. Do we agree? And just have that handshake agreement and align and abide by it. And if there's ever any straying from either side, just hold each other accountable. That's the best. But this is absolutely, if I thought about that transition, the hardest part, this is the hardest part, is the people management piece. Yeah.
I'm ending this. If you can, I think there's one slide.
I think it's the most important one.
It's the most important one. So, having been with Curran, I don't want to say half his life, but we've shared so many moments, family moments together. And last month, Nora Singh came into this life, and Curran is a father.
I did this panel with about 5 hours of sleep over the last month. So, yeah. No, I meant the last month.